This is Sky News at 11 o'clock. The headlines this evening. Residents encouraged to leave their homes as floods described as biblical breach record levels. The government promises emergency funding with waters expected to keep rising until Monday. Boeing passenger jets are grounded after the fuselage on an Alaska Airlines plane rips open mid-flight. He wants the White House back, the Supreme Court to rule if Donald Trump can run for president. The post office under criminal investigation after a TV drama prompts more potential victims to come forward. Newcastle take the bragging rights over rivals Sunderland in the Wear Tyne derby to progress to the fourth round of the FA Cup. Good evening. Residents living close to an overflowing river are tonight being encouraged to leave their homes and take refuge elsewhere. Parts of the River Trent in Nottinghamshire are at record levels after Storm Henk caused severe flooding. Visiting the area today, the local MP, Robert Jenrick, described the scenes to Sky News as biblical. Across the country, those affected will be able to apply for thousands of pounds in government money to pay for recovery work and repairs. Our first report tonight is from Sky's chief North of England correspondent Greg Milam, who reports now from Gibbsmere in Nottinghamshire, where severe flooding has left residents stranded and turned a hamlet into an island.
For the village of Gibbsmere, it is an unwelcome taste of island life, surrounded by floodwaters, largely cut off from the outside world. We hitched a lift on one of the only ways in, by tractor, to find a community swamped by their worst floods for 2 decades, and locals like business owner Tina Pollock, frustrated that no one's come to help.
We've lost how many thousands of pounds? The local pub and all the restaurants and around us have also lost all the business from us this week. And if somebody had come and just helped us, perhaps pump the road or sort the access, you know, we wouldn't be standing here now talking to you. I'd be up there working.
The last few days have made many wonder if this is a new normal.
It starts to make you think we almost perhaps ought to think about going onto higher ground, to be fair. But it's every 20 odd years at the moment, so it's not so bad. But it might not be every 20 years going forward. Who knows?
On the way out of Gibbsmere, we meet the farmer unable to reach his field of sheep.
We've got about 100 acres underwater and a lot of winter wheat ruined, and we will be a long while before it dries out to be able to do anything.
The local MP told Sky News that flooding, he described as biblical, demands government action.
We do need, as a country, to be investing ever more in flood protection because floods of this kind are becoming more and more regular. My constituency covers dozens of villages along the River Trent, and many of them do experience flooding on a regular basis and have done for hundreds of years, but it's happening more often and more severely.
And now comes a blast of cold weather, with warnings in place across the country when, for many, those floods have turned off the heating and electricity, as at this caravan park in Lincolnshire.
Well, yeah, it's pretty cold and, you know, it isn't the place to be, but when you've put so much time and effort and everything into it, it's hard to leave.
Nobody slept, no. It's just like a creeping death. You're just waiting for it to consume your caravan.
Those new warnings last all week, a winter freeze with us even before we know what those receding floodwaters will leave behind. Greg Milam, Sky News, Nottinghamshire.
Well, across the country, farming has been particularly badly hit by the floods. Farmers are calling on the government to invest more in river defences in rural areas to protect food production. Sky's business correspondent Paul Kelso reports now from Chipping Norton in Oxfordshire on the impact of the latest floods.
For the last few days, this farm has been more reservoir than fields. So what should be growing in here?
Wheat.
Ollie is the third generation of his family to farm on the banks of the Even Lode in Oxfordshire, one of many farmers looking at lost crops that could in turn increase food prices. So when do you think you can get on it?
Well, it'll be about 7 to 8 weeks, depending on the weather.
To plant?
To plant, yeah. It's been a very frustrating year.
The Environment Agency would like him to give up the field to improve flood control. He wants to keep growing food if the weather ever relents.
They want it for too long a period. They want it for 20 to 30 years, and I'm not prepared to release my land for that long. If it maybe was a 3 or 4 or 5 year programme, then maybe we'd think about it. And the money's got to be right as well. But we're farmers. We're here to grow food.
Farmland is one line of England's flood defences that are again being tested to breaking point, even if the rain, for now, has stopped. Somewhere in here is the River Windrush, a tributary of the Thames in Oxfordshire, a part of the country that is now considerably more Thames than valley.
The main channel of the river is just down here. There's a mill race across the other side, and the floodplain you can see in between is doing its job. When the water's high, it's supposed to look like this. Now, the water is receding here, but the Thames a few miles that way will continue to rise for a few days yet. And there is a trade-off here. The more land we deliberately give over to flooding, to hold back water, might be good news for towns and cities downstream, but it is less land available for food and farming.
It's not the only environmental concern when the waters rise. Heavy rain means sewage outflows, scores of them into the Thames this week. Every red symbol here is discharging water that could carry human effluent. Campaigners say it's a reminder water companies need to clean up their act.
Upstream of here, there are literally dozens of sewage treatment works that are discharging right now. For example, Benson, which is just a few miles upstream, has been discharging for 100 hours continuously, and many others similarly. So we've got thousands of hours of sewage flowing right past us. Where is that going to go? That is going to go into people's houses that are flooding.
Flooding is not new. Without it, this field wouldn't be so fertile. But the intensity and frequency of wet weather is. How we cope in future is a question of priorities. Paul Kelso, Sky News in Oxfordshire.
The US Federal Aviation Authority has ordered the grounding of Boeing 737 MAX 9 planes worldwide after a passenger plane was forced to make an emergency landing when part of the fuselage and the window blew out mid-flight. The plane, operated by Alaska Airlines, turned back to Portland minutes into its flight to California, with all 177 passengers and crew on board safe. Sky's Milena Veselinovic has the story.
Yes, we are emergency. We are depressurized. We do need to return back to. We have 177 passengers.
This was the scene just minutes after Air Alaska flight took off from Portland in Oregon. A huge hole blown in the fuselage of the plane, 16,000 feet up in the air. The cabin lashed by wind in videos posted on social media as the plane made an emergency landing. Thankfully, none of the nearly 200 people on board were seriously harmed.
Everything was normal until I just heard the boom. I'm not really sure exactly what happened, but parts of the wall were also flying everywhere. I just couldn't believe my eyes. I couldn't believe. There's a gaping hole, and you can see the city and the stars and everything just outside of the window. It was crazy.
Passengers described how a teenager's shirt was ripped by the force of the air.
And the mother was holding on to him, and she said her son's cell phone and some stuff blew out of the plane, and there was stuff blowing around back where they were because they were back where the wind was.
On the ground, the extent of the damage was clear. This Boeing 737-9 MAX was just 2 months old. It features a rear cabin door behind the wings, but these are permanently deactivated on Alaska Airlines.
This model of aircraft can have an emergency exit where that hole appeared. And it wasn't an option that the airline chose. It's a door that would have been locked into place or bolted into place. The big question is, how come it was not structurally sound?
Alaska Airlines has now grounded all of its Boeing 737-9 MAX planes while it carries out an investigation, looking for an answer to what caused this very close call. Milena Veselinovic, Sky News.
The Supreme Court in the United States will decide next month whether Donald Trump can run again for president. The justices agreed to take up Mr. Trump's appeal against a decision by Colorado to remove him from the 2024 ballot in that state. And it all comes 3 years to the day after the Capitol riots in Washington. But rather than keeping a low profile on the anniversary, the former president is campaigning at 2 rallies. Here's our U.S. correspondent, James Matthews.
3 years to the day, and the spirit of January the 6th lives on. So does the division. This was a protest outside the US Department of Justice in support of those jailed after January the 6th. It was a violent insurrection at the heart of US democracy. But time has created competing versions of events that day. Listen to the views here. January 6th was an event instigated by a crowd that marched on the Capitol. Why don't you believe that?
Because honestly, I believe that if you look at the full cascade of videos that are out there, you will see a much different story.
That's a setup. And people were tricked into going inside the Capitol building.
The doors were opened up, they were let in. They were
because
invited.
Of the weight of the crowd, because of numbers.
No, they weren't even pushing towards the Capitol by the footage. They're just standing there, and the officers opened the door and let them in.
This is video newly released. It shows rioters inside the Capitol building at the door to the chamber of the House of Representatives.
Come on, man, open the door!
As one films through the door, you see on his screen a law enforcement officer pointing his gun.
We're sick of this.
Then you see him through the door.
We're sick of it. Okay? 30 years. Would you? Huh? And I've never had people like this.
The President of the United States, Joe Biden.
January 6th is the dividing and defining line through US politics, as reinforced by a president who invoked its events and implications as the calendar clicked into election year and he clocked on to campaign mode.
Donald Trump's campaign is obsessed with the past, not the future. He's willing to sacrifice our democracy.
Donald Trump conducts his campaign amidst uncertainty over where it goes. Colorado has blocked him from the Republican primary ballot, but now the Supreme Court has said it will hear an appeal against that. On his campaign trail, the politics and the law travel hand in hand.
And then he says that I'm bad for democracy. He's bad for democracy for another reason. He's incompetent. And when you're incompetent, you're bad for democracy. You're very bad for democracy.
On a wet Saturday in Washington, D.C., the look of January the 6th this year was rather different from the day at the Capitol 3 years ago. Even if for a small crowd of demonstrators, the sentiment was the same. January the 6th, 2021 was a landmark date in this country for how it shaped American politics at the time and for how it shapes them still.
And the rocket's red glare.
Today, as then, the same issues surround the seat of power. James Matthews, Sky News, in Washington.